Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming to today's Atticus Vantage webinar, Forecasting Cash Flow, the three-step process to projecting when shelter in place may end, when inquiries will increase, and the impact on your revenue expenses. My name is Mike Wells. I'll be the moderator in the background today. Today's presenter is President and Founder of Atticus, Mark Powers. Mark, I know you have a lot of information to fit into today's session, so I'm going to let you take it away for us here. And if you need me, I'll be right here in the background.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. So yes, we're going to be talking about cash flow and what your cash flow is going to be looking like over the next 3 or 4 months. And for some of you, a little further down the line. So by way of introduction, Mike said it, I'm Mark Powers, President of Atticus. Most of you on this call should know me. And these calls are usually reserved for Atticus, the Atticus community, but we've encouraged you to open them up. And I know some of you on this call may not be familiar with Atticus, so let me just do a quick overview. Atticus is the #1 coaching company, bar none, in the country. We've been doing it for 30 years, only law firms. We've got the best trained, best skilled, most experienced practice advisors or coaches in the country. We do regulate things like this, webinars, we do workshops, we do coaching programs. We have a service called Build My Great Team, where we'll recruit, hire, and get the team going. Plus, we always have a line of books on time management, marketing, staffing, and cash flow. So you can always find out more about Atticus. Today, we're going to be focusing on your cash flow. So there are 2 handouts attached to this webinar. One is a cash flow projection tool, and another, it looks like a graph that you should either download or pull out because you'll want to use them on this session because we're going to be pretty interactive, or as much as we can. So take lots of notes, and if you have a question along the way, it's okay to ask. There's a button to raise your hand or type a question in, and Mike will get it. And if it's critical that we stop or urgent, we'll take that. If not, Mike will find the appropriate time to get the question to us. So the intention for today is to make sure you can get a very good idea of when the shelter in place is going to end for you, your state, your community, when the inquiries will increase, and what's going to impact those revenues when the revenues when they do increase. And we're going to make sure that we can we can consistently position you as the market leader, and we'll also answer any questions along the way. So anyone that's been around Atticus any length of time or been through our programs have heard about the Stockdale Paradox. I'm not going to go into Admiral Stockdale. I highly recommend looking him up, reading about him. Phenomenal character in our recent history. But he had this great quote, which defined how he was successful in taking so many young men alive out of POW camps in Vietnam. And he said that you can never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And so we are in a crisis, and we will get through this crisis like the crisis you've got through before. But what's going to truly get us through there is making sure we take time to confront the brutal facts. And when it comes to looking at your cash flow and the implications and the decisions we have to make because of that cash flow, it gets very difficult for us. And it's stuff we don't want to look at we don't like to look at a lot. So we're going to have to confront some brutal realities here. And when it comes to forecasting your cash flow, I want you to think about it like this reverse bell curve. And this is your revenue. So pre-crisis, it was either doing better than it was last year, or a little worse, but where it was, wherever it was. And then the shelter-in-place order came down, the crisis happened, and you started adapting. You went virtually very, very quickly. Some of you started to scale back expenses, which we were recommending you do. Some of you started even cutting back appropriately where you had to on staff. You have tapped into your government funding where you could, the PPP program, and congratulations again to all of you that got that. And to those of you that are still applying, we hope for the best for you. And also during this adapting down or adjusting, you probably had to prioritize files and make sure you were going to give the most attention to those that had filing deadlines or that we could drive to cash quickly, because we wanted to make sure we were cash getting in. And then as you got down to your revenue started falling. Now, by the way, let me say something about this bell curve. It will look very different for a PI firm versus an estate planning firm. You will have a bell curve and you will have a revenue drop off. It just happened at different places, and we'll talk about that. I'll give you some very specific examples. But as you start to come down, we don't want to stabilize here, but at least the drop in revenue started to stabilize a bit. And this is a very important point for all of you, and that's where we are today, is that we have to, today is the time to be marketing, not tomorrow, not next week, not after the shelter in place is lifted. It's now is the time to be marketing. Now is the time to be connecting to your referral sources. Now is the time to be staying connected to your clients and creating top of mind awareness. Now is the time to work on infrastructure issues. All of these things can happen here, but then you're going to start scaling up. The inquiries are going to start, the intake is going to start, and you're going to start scaling up. Now, scaling up, you're going to have to open the office again for some of you if you've gone virtual. By the way, we'll be posting some stuff this week on how to do that safely. And as you open the office, you're going to be adapting. You may be scaling up your marketing, you may be scaling up some of your production in different areas, but we will suggest that you will have learned a great deal from this crisis. And you've learned about operating more in technology, marketing, staffing, space allocations. You have learned a lot, and you're going to develop some efficiencies, some improvements, some breakthroughs, and they're going to define what your future operations are going to look like. And there will be a lot of good adjustments for you. So while this is a crisis, it is going to drive some interesting opportunities. But today, we're really looking at just the cash flow projection over this time, what this bell curve looks like for you. So what I want to look at is what precedes this revenue dropping off. Now, some of it should seem pretty simple, but we've got to remember that as we start to project revenue through a crisis like this, let me say it this way, the number of inquiries, the number of consults, the number of signups always precedes a fall off in your revenue or an influx in the revenue. So I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but it'll be very important as we go along. So right about here, for most of you, not all of you, PI firms are a little different in your revenue, but it will still have a fall off. Inquiries went down and intake went down, probably for most of you 50, 75%, depending on your practice area. Revenue will follow. Oh, I'm sorry, gang. Revenue will follow. So depending on your practice area, these new revenues could be immediate. So if we do get an increase in inquiries again, for some of you, like a estate planning practice, you might see quicker revenues connected to your inquiries. For those of you that are family law, it might take 2 months, 3 months before those revenues on your new inquiries to show up. And if you're a PI firm, it could take 18 months, 12, 18 months for now to see those new revenues. But they are always connected, and that will be critical as we come through this process. So a question I have for you is, if we're going to make projections, we can clearly see what's happened to date. But if we're going to make projections about the future, what will influence clients starting to call you again, or the number of inquiries you get? Now, end of shelter in place has happened. Now what happens? Why do you get more inquiries? So probably it's going to be a factor of timing. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, how people start getting out in the community. So we know in family law practices, people have to get a little bit more privacy from their spouse to start making phone calls and start doing some internet searches and start to talk to people about their divorce. We know in PI, after the shelter in place, when we see more cars on the road, we see retail opening up. Again, it's going to be slow during phase 1 and phase 2, but over time, as those things happen, the inquiries will jump up. And it'll jump a little different for an advertising firm versus a referral-based firm. So mostly it's going to be a little different, but you're going to have to start thinking about that and thinking about what your clients are doing that will jump inquiries. More than anything, what will get your inquiries going is to make sure you're marketing right now. So this call is not to talk about marketing. We're doing a call on that next week and the week after, and we've done a number of calls on it. But the more top of mind awareness that we have right now with our clients and our referral sources during the shutdown, during the shelter in place, that's going to make the biggest difference for inquiries starting up for you quicker. So if you're losing touch with your referral sources and some of your more influential clients, and you're not creating top of mind awareness, it's going to take longer for you to get those inquiries to flow. And you will see as we make these projections, we need those inquiries to start as quickly as possible. So in projecting cash flow, a couple of numbers that will be helpful for you. So you may have these, and if you don't, go get them. Every firm on this call should be tracking the number of leads they get. Whether you call those inquiries or qualified leads, however you define that first level of good entry for your firm, you should be tracking the number you had for January, February, and March, and April. And so we knew they dropped off in March and April. And of the qualified leads, how many appointments did we get? And of the appointments, how many signups did we get? And they're not always exactly correlated because you're going month to month, but it's great to track those, very important. And then we also want to look at the revenue over that period and the expenses. So we have some real numbers to work with, and then we're going to have projected numbers. The other two numbers you want that are going to be very, very helpful for you in getting cash flow projection together is your average fee per file. So if you're a family law practice, your average fee could be $30,000, it could be $15,000, whatever it is. You're going to need to know that over time, and it's helpful to know it. And how long a file stays in your pipeline. So that's time on desk, from opening to closing. And when I say closing, to collecting all the revenue. Some of you are collecting it all the way. Some of you are collecting it after settlement. For wherever it is, how long they're in the pipeline. So those are helpful numbers in the background. So I'm going to walk you through a process, and you're going to have to go back and sort of put this data, or have someone on your team put this data together. So let's start. If ending shelter in place and getting about our business is one of the defining moments in starting to project our revenue, and not having that bell curve stay at the bottom too long, when will it end in your community? Well, for some of you, it's ending right now. So McKinsey and Company, a consulting company, in mid-April created a report for business, and it talked about what the coronavirus spread looked like. And so they built their own, this is a regular bell curve, right? And you've all seen some version of this. So it starts out with small clusters, some uncontrolled acceleration, and then some deceleration of the spread, falling off, getting back to normal, and then depending on how well we do here, some resurgence, and how we respond to that will be different. So what's interesting is if you developed a grid, if you laid a grid over this and made it a calendar grid, you could start to see or project where it might happen in your community. So if you're in New York, or you're in Florida, or you're in Texas, or you're in California, it could be a very different place for you where you're going to see it. And when you do see an end to shelter in place, again, shelter in place is connected to what? It's connected to your referrals and your intake picking up again. So this becomes a particular mile mark for us. So it will be different by your state. It will be different by your community. So I'm in Florida, and rural Florida or northern Florida will open up quicker than South Florida, because South Florida is very much more compressed with people, far more people in a smaller space. But you should be able to look at that and figure out where phase one starts. And for this estimate, let's say it happens in mid-May or the beginning of May. And I know some of you, it's happening, phase one's happening even earlier. So if we have that information and you can pick and you can put that in your community, by the way, what this usually looks like, or the recommendation is that you'd have some sustained reduction in cases for 14 days before you start phase one. Now, other states are doing that a little quicker, so you'll see how that goes. But end in shelter in place and some other factors. So it's either time, people getting on the road, people getting away from their spouses, people going to malls. That will begin the uptick for new leads. And it's in consideration of phase one, phase two, phase three. So phase one, if we have a May opening, that could be, phase one could go anywhere from June to July. That's still an open question. And so we'll see limited exposure. You'll have those first people jumping out there being a little bit, hopefully being a little careful with their masks, still social distancing. You don't usually see bars and schools and gyms opening during this phase. Phase two is you'll see a little bit more liberal opening, and then phase three is we should be back to normal. So you'll have to keep an eye on what these look like and their time frames. Again, I don't want to get too, I don't want to make this too complex, but they influence your projections. And your projection really is going to be your best guess. So you've got a form attached to this webinar, and it looks like this. And you'll want to print it out and use it to graph and create a visual for your projections of inquiry, projection of cash, and projection of expenses. And I'll run a couple of examples for you. But first, you'll want to put in some place where you think the end in shelter in place is. For my example, I'm going to put it mid-May. It could be the beginning of May, it could be the end of May, but this is phase one starting. And so I'm going to look at 3 different types of firms, and I'll show you what we want you to do with this. So I'll take a look first at a personal injury firm, and we'll say they're opening mid-month on the calendar, mid-May on the calendar. Now, this calendar goes through June of next year. It's an 18-month calendar. And the reason is for PI firms, their time on desk for files are 12 to 18 months. So let's take a look at the implications. So if I look at most PI firms today going through this crisis, and we talk about some of our Atticus clients, will see the inquiries looking something like this. Now, to be clear, this is a general projection. You're going to have to take a look for yourself and make your own. But this firm saw, and a lot of PI firms saw some pretty good intake in January and February. So this could have been better than last year for a lot of PI firms. But then right after February, the beginning of March, we started to see a drop off, and it got to 45%. And by the end of April, most firms, your firm may not be there, but most firms are seeing a 50 to 60% drop off on leads, in revenue. I apologize. This is inquiries, right? Sorry, the blue is inquiries. So they saw a 50 to 60% drop off in inquiries, new cases. And now May starts, people start to come back. They're starting to go out in their cars. If they're a referral firm, it's going to go up a little slower, getting back to normal sometime around October in intake. Again, you may see this differently and you can project it differently. An advertising firm may see the uptick coming up a little quicker, and they would see it coming up a little earlier. Now, what's interesting, so you'll draw your own, this is just inquiries, and they're tracking actual until the end of April, and then they're projecting forward when it gets back to normal. So for a PI firm, what happens on cash flow? This is what the cash flow looks like. So in the first couple through the because there's a drop off in intake somewhere in the fourth quarter or the first, second, and third quarter of next year, first and second quarter, their revenue is going to drop. Now, it's not going to drop as quickly as the inquiries did, but they will have a drop in revenue. That revenue can be projected. So if I have, say that if I'm a PI firm, my average file is $10,000. Yours could be $20,000. Yours could be $5,000. It could be more. But if they have 100 cases that they usually would have taken in, say if they're not a big firm, they normally would have taken in this point 100 cases. And if they projected 50% of those probably would have made it to settlement. That means there's 50 cases times 10,000, that they're going to have a revenue drop off somewhere around $500,000 over this year. Now,
hey, Mark,
if you're a larger firm, yes.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we lost connection with you for a few moments ago. With this particular slide, would you maybe start over for folks? I had a couple people type in, they lost you for about 60 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just a quick review on this. So we're looking at various types of firms and projecting inquiries, revenue, expenses for cash flow perspective over the next 3 to 4 months. And for personal injury, you have to go further. So we projected the inquiries off of their actuals. For most PI firms, they were having a pretty good January and February. But then we're going to see a 45, 50%, 60% drop in inquiries up until now. Now, given that end of shelter in place is mid-May, we are saying for this example, and we now know people are getting in their cars. They are going to retail locations, they're going to malls. This means there's more business out there, more inquiries, and they're going to start picking up. If I am a referral firm, it's going to pick up a little less quickly than if I'm an advertising firm. So an advertising firm might see it come up a little quicker. either way, you're going to have your own little bell curve. What's fascinating for PI firms, they're going to have one of their best revenue years ever, because while revenues are going to stay constant for a while this year, in the fourth quarter, first quarter, and second quarter of next year, revenue is going to drop off. And depending on your average fee and time on desk, if you're a small firm, that could be $500,000 it's off. And if you're a large firm, that's millions of dollars this is off. But so revenue will be good. And let's take a look at expenses for the PI world. So for most PI, your expenses are staying pretty normal. And the reason is you've got all these files to work. You're not laying off people. Any dip you have would be negotiating with, if you're an advertising firm in any way, negotiating some expenses away. Or you have had to get rid of some expenses out of a sense of caution. But business starts coming up, you've got to work those files more as they're coming in. You're not collecting the money on them. You're still collecting the money from last year. And your revenues are going down and your expenses are pretty constant here. I hope this is making sense. And Mike, if someone wants to ask a question, they can, if it's not. But there becomes an interesting point for these firms. Should I cut expenses? I've still got revenue to cover them, and I actually made more revenue back here. Should I just hold off on expenses here? And my advice is no. I would be looking, when we project the downfall in cash flow, we should be downsizing our expenses where we can to try to match the revenue and keep your margins. Here's the reason. All firms develop bloat. They get expenses that sort of bloat up over time, and they show up everywhere. People's salaries get too high. We don't look at our bills as closely, and we just get a lot of bloat. So really the crisis is an opportunity to push efficiencies and push innovation. But to do that, you've got to hold your margins a little tighter and keep the profit margin there and drop expenses. So this is the PI firm. Mike, anybody have any questions about this example? Because I'm going to do two more.
No, not yet, Mark.
Okay. I hope this is making sense, but you want this visual because it's going to say where and when I have to make some of those crucial decisions. This firm should be making them right around here and start thinking about reducing expenses. Now, that's tricky because a lot of you are very generous and don't want to make any cuts. But I think you're by not doing that, you're costing your competitive opportunity in the marketplace, because you're not driving to efficiencies where other firms will be. So based on the loss of leads cases, based on their average fees, time on desk, and projected expenses, this practice is projected to lose millions for most firms over the next 12 to 18 months.
Mark, we do have a question that came in on this slide. It says, Mark, most of the PI firms' big expenses are personnel and advertising. The rest are peanuts. So are you saying personnel first?
I am saying personnel. So unless you make some cuts, you don't get to see who's really essential and valuable. There is bloat in there, and you can do different things with people. But as you've gone virtual, you've seen that some people are more valuable and critical and essential than others. And it's a good time to tighten up your team. There are people on your team that are not great performers. Now, here for the PI firm is the time to address that. And so, yes, it is with personnel. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. You've made some gains here, but you want to get back to normal margins, which is 30, 35%. If you have to take a 20%, 25, it's okay, but you've got to make some expense cuts and not get comfortable here. So yes, personnel. I'm going to do a model on estate planning. So very, very different. This is a 12-month model. We don't have to look at it over 18 months like a PI firm. So here again, shelter in place sometime in May, ending. So here are inquiries. Blue are the number of inquiries. So for a lot of estate planning firms, they weren't having a great January and February. It's not a great time for estate planning. But when you would think, when it often would pick up is in March, it's dropping off. And so the inquiries dropped off fairly quickly for them, much worse than some other areas, 50, 60, 75% to the end of April. So the question is, after shelter in place ends, what's the projection? And it's a little gloomier for estate planning. They don't expect it to pick up too quickly. For some estate planners that I've talked to, this is optimistic for it to pick up on their projections. Now, the length of this slowdown in inquiries past the shelter in place is absolutely tied into your marketing efforts. How well you're staying connected to your referral sources, how well you're staying connected to your influencers, top of mind awareness, and if you can make any adjustment for estate planners to doing virtual webinars, which is a little trickier. So a lot of estate planners' business come out of seminars. They're hard to get going. They're hard to get people out to. So that's why they're going to have a slower progression on their inquiries. Their revenue doesn't stay like an estate planner, like a PI firm. It's very closely tied. Their files stay in, they work them, and their revenues stay very closely tied to their inquiries. So is revenues going to fall off pretty dramatically, and then expenses are going to have to follow suit. But unless this estate planner has other practice areas to offset their revenue, they're going to have to make some dramatic cuts. Remember, the green line is revenue. The black line is expenses. And a lot of this, unfortunately, is going to be personnel. And so unless you've got enough PPP to cover you and cover you for quite a while, or you've got some, you're making some furlough decisions, some layoff decisions, estate planning firms are going to have some tricky times here. And they have to be able to work with their referral sources quickly. They have to get seminars, virtual seminars, something going, because they're going to experience losses, significant losses over April, May, June, August, September. It's going to be a tough haul for estate planners. And so they have to make some really crucial decisions back in here right now based on their projections. Now you could say, Mark, I don't agree with this. I'm an estate planner. I don't agree with you. That's okay. Build your own projections. See what it's going to be and see where the expenses line up here. I'll give you a tool to make these projections. But once you see how they line up, it tells me whether I have to apply the Stockdale Paradox, that I know I'm going to get through this. I know we can get through this. I just got to get people working with me, and we have to make crucial decisions, probably around staff, probably around layoffs, probably after your PPP loan can carry you through, and probably after some furloughing. And the difference is furloughing, I'm saying you're probably going to come back. Layoffs is I have no plan to take you back right now. So that's an estate planning model. Let's look at a family law model. So family law, same example, 12-month calendar, May. Again, you may have shelter in place phase 1 starting in June. You may have it in May 1st. You may have it May 30th. Wherever it is, plug it in for you. But then track your actual inquiries, which for family law dropped off like everyone else in April, fairly dramatically. And so if they were getting 10 a month, they were starting to get 3 a month. And then if you look at the shelter in place, here's an interesting thing about a family law practice. Family law has pent up demand, meaning if there were 1 million divorces in 2019, there's going to be probably 1.2 million divorces in 2020. And they're not going away. They're just pent up during this time, waiting to come back. So they should see a spike, and it should go up fairly quickly, and it should go up higher than what it was. But they'll make those projections, and they'll have to figure out with their marketplace, what do people do after the shelter in place? What has them start to call? For family lawyers, it's absolutely being connected right now to your referral sources and your clients, because that's where the business is going to start coming from. And the more I do that today, the better chance I can influence this line coming up quicker. The quicker we can change this bell curve, and you have influence over it, the quicker we can change that, the better. So let's look at revenue for a family law practice. It looks a little bit more like this. So they have work in progress. If they're a complex family law practice, meaning they have complex clients, they could have a lot of billable hours that could carry them even further. But they will see a drop off because there's no additional work. Now, I want to be clear. Some of you are not experiencing this kind of drop off. Most of you are. Some of you worse than others. So you're in different places, but use the tracking we talked about, inquiries for January, February, March, April. They're the ones you know. Compare it to revenue and compare it to expenses. These are things you know. And then you'll put your actual numbers on your graph and start projecting what's going to happen on the uptick. So they will be a little bit behind their inquiries, cash will start coming in, and then it will get back up to norm. It could take them a little while, September, October, to get back up to norm. Their expenses might look a little bit like this. It'll be good up until April. PPP might keep them up a little bit, but they're going to have to get expenses down, and they're going to have to take some serious look right around July and August in this person's case, in this firm's case, because they're either going to have some money to carry their people through, or they're going to have people take less pay to carry them through, shareholder pay go down to carry them through. I don't mean shareholder distributions. I'm talking about partner pay going down, furloughing people. But you're going to have to make some tough decisions around here because your revenue is getting too tight here. And you're either going to eat it, which I don't recommend you do. It's not good for the organization to eat too much of that. So that's an example. You're going to want to draw this out and project your cash during these periods. So the next step is to forecast your cash. And there's a tool that Mike is attached to this webinar. And it's a tool we use with our clients for this, but it gives you January through December with your actual inquiries through April, your projected inquiries, your best guess here through May, June, July, based on last year, based on what you can see happening after shelter in place, you're going to make projections. Now, you can track these with reality and see if you're doing better or worse than what you said, but you should have projections here.
Mark,
based on that projection.
Come in related to the previous slides. Do you want to wait on those? Okay, so the first question was, what about foreclosure defense practices, landlord tenant? When and how much do you expect that to pick up after the shelter in place?
I don't know if I could say for foreclosure. I'd have to look. I really talked through a couple of firms, but if I was talking to that person, I'd want to know what their inquiries were off of this. We would think with foreclosure and bankruptcy, they're probably not seeing a big drop off in inquiries because it's at some level. I imagine they're going to see an increase in inquiries coming very soon.
Okay.
And they'll have to do a revenue projection model on that. So it's a little bit for their practice of a growth model instead of a big drop off, I'm guessing.
All right. And our other question, I don't know if this is too early to even predict, but how does the second wave that is
It's a
predicted,
great question.
could it impact this analysis? How could it impact it?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a great question. It could have a dramatic impact. If you go back to any of these, the estate planning one, this is tough enough to crawl out of this hole. Look at this estate planning practice. They have to find a way to get seminars going again because that's where they get a lot of their business. So imagine they figure it out. People are feeling safe in July and August, September. They're feeling good about being out there, and another wave hits. It's going to knock them down big time. Now, we hope we have a better response and we develop a better response, but I think it'll have a dramatic impact on estate planning practice. Family law, maybe not quite as much because we probably won't do as much shelter in place as we did this last time. I think we're learning. We can only hope we're learning. But I think it has another serious impact. I would still be conserving cash flow. I would still be innovating with virtual marketing opportunities. I think there's some breakthroughs to be had there. So I think there's some serious implications if that happens.
Would you combine criminal law firms with the personal injury type of prediction?
No. Criminal law fell off very, very quickly, similar to a family law, but they fell off very quickly. And so a criminal lawyer markets often through some advertising referral sources, but a good criminal lawyer was getting business by going into the jailhouse, visiting his client or her client, and doing a little walking around. They shake up some business. The criminal justice system, police are not arresting quite as many people. They're letting people out of jails during the coronavirus, which means people don't have pressure to get their criminal lawyer to do something. So no, I am looking at criminal law as having a tough haul here. It should pick up okay, but it's going to be another slow pickup. They're going to want to look at. Here's what I would do. If you're in the Atticus community, absolutely go through this exercise with your coach and work through this question, like what's going to happen with our clients. We know this. I mean, you know this better than anyone. If you took a minute and studied your clients and their behavior before they called you, who do they talk to? Where do they go? How does it happen? And then we have to reverse that. Okay, where are those going to influence us here? This is a great marketing exercise because it forces us to do what we should have done all along, which is understand our clients' frustrations and concerns and behaviors and try to be there more often and solve more of those before our competition could do that. So I didn't build one for criminal law, but I would see it pretty close to family law and maybe even a little bit more difficult because they don't have deferred demand. Meaning if I was going to get a divorce before this, I'm still going to get it afterwards. I just didn't have access to the lawyer or the court. But if I was going to get arrested, I'm not necessarily going to go out all of a sudden get arrested again right away. So they're more like PI in the sense that their demand happens as people get out in society and as policing works a little stronger again. So it's a slower uptick for them. I hope that answers it, Mike.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll open it up for questions. If you have your questions, let's go through them, but definitely go through this exercise with your coach. And do this. Take your inquiries, take the actuals, and then make your best guess on criminal law, on bankruptcy, on foreclosure, on family law, on PI, and then take your actual revenues and then project out. This is your best guess based on your average fees and based on how long those files tend to take to turn into cash. It's very different for a family law and a criminal law than it is for a PI firm. And then track your expenses, what you've actually done, and you can project what you're actually doing through the rest of the year, and then look at cash on hand. Now, I'm talking about this not in an accrual model, but in a cash model. And cash is critical for you. So how much cash will you have on hand at the end of every month? Now, this doesn't equate to profit necessarily, but you would want your cash models to be doing very healthy through this whole thing. If it's not in May, June, July, August, September, then you're going to have to make some decisions. So over here, we have to look at what funds we have available. Some of you will need to carry the firm's personnel for a little longer. Maybe we take pay cuts, but we take them a little longer and we keep them with the firm. Maybe we do layoffs, but how much cash or funds do I have available? What's in my operating account? What can I bill against in my trust account if I have a trust account? What's in account receivables that I can collect over the next 90 days? What additional accounts do I have? My profit account for some of you that are in the Atticus community. How much did I get on my PPP loan? What do I have available for credit lines? Are there any loans that I have access to? Now I'm going to use all this money. I just want to know what I have available. Then I want to start looking at what are the possible expense reductions. So Atticus will tell you when you're first approaching these, we're making non-essential cuts. But for you estate planners, some of you are family law, some of you criminal law, you're going to have to look at where you can save money and how much on partial pay, furloughing or laying off, deferring rent, mortgage, lease. Now, I'll say this to be clear. For some of you, when it comes to employees, your mortgage, your rent, absolutely that will happen after your PPP, because that will last 8 weeks. So it'll happen after that, but you got to be planning for it. And shareholder salaries, reductions, and what's the total I can get. Then, so if you were one of my clients or you were an Atticus client, which most of you are, I'd be having you look at, and we'd be talking about what are the 3 biggest decisions that we can make that will influence our margins and the health and welfare of this firm. Your job is to take care of the health of this firm so that it can survive this and take care of clients and you for the long haul. So our job is to protect the firm, not necessarily protect every employee. I know that sounds terrible, but your job is to protect the firm, for it to survive and take care of people for the long haul and take care of you and your family and all of your staff for the long haul that you can bring back if you have to. So what 3 decisions do you have to make? It may be more. So you may have some insights right now, and you may have some actions. So you might be thinking about the 3 biggest insights. And Mike, in a minute, I'll open this up to questions, but I'd like people, if you want to get the most out of this webinar, type in what your biggest insight is out of this conversation. and any action you might take. So where do we go from here? I'll do your biggest takeaways in a minute, but what's next is build a cash flow projection using your best estimates, your best guess based on this webinar. Use the forms, use the tools we gave you, and give yourself and the key team members, whether they're your partners, your key your administrators, a visual tool to work with. Graph it out like we did here. It becomes a little bit more real. When you look at the cash flow projection, it's one thing. When you put it out into a graph and you look at the visual, it starts to become a little clearer that you're going to have to make some critical decisions for some of you. And then finally, address those tough decisions. Talk to your coach, but make the necessary decisions. Act on them. It takes a lot of courage to do this, but this is the stuff that hones your abilities. This crisis hones your abilities as a leader, and it's a leader of a firm that's going to be here for a long time, and the leader of a firm that's going to make a lot of difference for people. And the other thing is we need to be marketing and virtually doing case intake now. So give you a couple of things, and then we can take some questions and insight. Next week, May 6th, we're doing a webinar on virtual case intake. So a little bit about marketing virtually, but getting the, being able to do more about taking a client in virtually. A lot of you are having to do that, but we'll do some additional work on it. Write that down, May 6th at 3 p.m. Make sure you're staying informed. I know that not everyone on this call is a Atticus client, and we don't always open these webinars up, but especially during this crisis we have. And if you wanted to be invited to these webinars, write down this phone number, 407-833-6688. 407-833-6688. Text the word Atticus, and we'll make sure you get an invitation to these webinars on a regular basis.
Hey, Mark, I just wanted to say about that texting. If you received an invitation that got you to this webinar, you're already on that list.
Okay, good. So you don't need to. If you got an invitation, a lot of you were sent invitations by another Atticus client, which is fine. Or you could just email grow@atticusadvantage.com. The other thing I would do is we're posting videos on the Atticus YouTube channel. So if you go to this link, and Mike will put it, Mike, where can they get this if they don't write this down?
I'm going to post this in the chat box momentarily.
Okay, good. So just put this in your youtube.com/user/Atticus coach and hit subscribe, and you'll get these as they're posted. Make sure you go to the Facebook page. Our clients are giving us great tools. We just had a great tool given to us about opening your office safely. So we're posting those online. Every day we're doing a hotline for coronavirus issues around your practice. So you've got urgent issues. Mike might post this information as well. There's a dial-in information, access code. Again, I'm sorry that this particular hotline is reserved for Atticus clients because we just can't handle the volume of everyone calling into that. So Mike, let's take final thoughts and questions. You can raise your hand, type it in, Mike can unmute you, whatever works.
We have a few takeaways that have been pushed in, and one question and a compliment. I'll start with the compliment first, because this comes from a longtime client, Anna. Anna says, "Thank you for all you do. Thanks to you, we're in excellent shape in her firm, and to survive and thrive, kudos." The question is, I got the impression that you recommend not taking money from our personal savings to use it as a lifeline for our firm. Is that correct? And if so, why?
All right. So I am very hesitant to do that until you've done your projections. If you are a practice that you are clear, like a family law practice, that the business is going to be upticking very quickly, and you've got to keep the personnel engaged there as it ticks up, and you need the cash, not a lot, but you need some cash to cover you that small amount of time. Take it. It's okay. I am not a big fan of it. I'm a bigger fan of cutting expenses if you can. Living within your budget if you can, because it forces the organization to make some tough decisions. It puts you on a forced diet that you probably needed anyways. So I'm not saying don't do it if it's a good, you've analyzed it, you've done a projection, and you could see, oh, I just got to get over this hump, and it's very clear to you. That's not so clear to an estate planner. So I am not a big fan of it. I am a fan of cutting if you don't see that quick uptick, and putting a firm on a forced diet where people are taking quarter pay, half pay, and keeping their jobs, or people are furloughed. But those are tough decisions. None of us like to make them. So that's my answer, Mike. I don't like it. If it's a good investment and it's clear that you've got somebody else to look at it with you, have your coach look at those numbers and see if it's a good projection. Otherwise, I would recommend a forced diet. And it's healthier for the firm in the long haul.
A couple of the takeaways are very similar. The biggest takeaway for some of these people is that their job is to ensure the survival of the firm, not propping up the household budgets of employees. A couple of people said that a couple different ways. Another one is I need to look immediately at reducing expenses. It can't wait several months. And then we have a couple more questions.
Okay.
So first question is, in other words, will PPP recipients be eligible for a second round of PPP funding after gathering and received the first round?
We don't know. I am not optimistic about that. I'm not optimistic about that. I'm just not optimistic about it. We don't know, and I'm not optimistic about it. So you're going at the end of the 8 weeks, there's a new decision to be made, but that doesn't happen at the end of 8 weeks. That decision happens now, and we act on that decision at the end of 8 weeks. So we build our projections, make the decisions we have to make, and then we act on them at the end of 8 weeks. If there's a new round coming, God bless us all, but I don't think it will happen. And I'm just not optimistic, but that's me.
Okay. Had a statement come in. This person says, I have an estate planning and elder law firm, and the best thing I did was drastically cut expenses, in parentheses, employees, immediately. I kept one part-time. This allowed me to retain my margins, retain my cash, and still service my clients. I'm now bringing another one back on a very part-time basis, and I will increase our hours as business continues to grow, but we'll do so carefully. Next.
Mike, can I just say something to that for the estate planners? Estate planners have to, everyone does, but especially so, really work their referral network strong right now, because they're not going to have live seminars healthy for a while. And then if there's a second go around, it'll be worse. But for estate planners, look at, explore how to do virtual webinars with some of your referral sources and their clients. You'll have to experiment with that. Listen, someone's going to have to get a breakthrough there. It might as well be you.
All right. Next question. If cutting staff isn't an option because all of them have been with the firm for so long and they'll be needed in the uptick, are there other expenses we can cut?
I don't have to let go of furlough staff, but I can cut pay. I can cut people's pay. I can give people a notice now that it doesn't, after the end of the PPP period, that we're going to have to make some. So start reducing your household expenses now, because we're going to reduce pay by 25%. And I'm going to reduce my pay by a certain amount. So I can. And the biggest impact, and I'm sorry to say it, is still with staff. And we have to find a way. And this is what, when we weren't joking around when we said these are the brutal facts that we have to face. And we're going to have to make some crucial decisions. But it is for the long haul, not for the short term. And it's for the health of your clients that we're doing this. Your clients need you. They need you to survive.
I think that's a great point. The clients need you to survive, so you have to make the right decisions as a business owner. We have one final question, and this one is, are landlords of office buildings generally open to giving a rent break under these circumstances? Is there a standard practice out there?
Not that I know of, and I'm a big fan of making requests. I'm a big fan of making requests and see what happens. You know, that's different for everyone. Some landlords wouldn't touch that. Some landlords have wonderful margins of money and they can do it, and some don't and won't do it. So there's no telling with that. So I'm sorry, I don't have a really good, strong answer other than I would make a request. And I'm a big fan of making big requests and see what happens.
We've had a couple people reply to this. One person says there's a moratorium in California on landlords, and another one say that their friends have had landlords who are not budging, unfortunately. Do you have time for one last question, and then we'll close out today's session?
Okay, we're after 2. I'm okay if everybody else is okay.
Okay. So money via PPP and EIDL is cheap. Some banks are reducing lines of credit interest. Law office funding companies are saying there will be a downturn in PI cases, so you should consider their products in advance of such a downturn. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Do I think well, it's a lot of thoughts, right? I don't think there is a downturn in intake right now. But I don't think that going away. I think the economy is going to come back. I think people will be out driving cars. I think people will be out shopping. I think the claims will be there and they'll go back up. It just depends over what period of time. I can influence that by how much I market today. Now the business there is still business out there today, but it's not as much. But I can get my marketing working today with my referral sources or my advertising ready to kick in more and more as the market comes back. I've got to stay with them and be ahead of them. When I say market, I'm talking about population moving in the economy.
Thank you, Mark. I can tell you that about 80% of the people for sure who registered for today showed up. We had well over 125 people. So this is an important topic still. So thank you for presenting this to everybody out here on our broadcast today, to our clients, to our friends of Atticus, and thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, and be safe. We'll talk to you soon.